Hello and welcome to the Ranorex Webtestit release webinar. My name is Michael Schweikhofer. I'm joined today by a trusty colleague.
Yeah, hello, my name is William Saftic.
We are quite excited of answering all your questions. As those come in to your mind, please use the Q&A panel and we will get those questions answered for you as quickly as we can. So what we want to show you today is an introduction of what is Webtestit, why there is the need for it, how it compares to Ranorex Studio, and how it makes testers' life easier. We will then give you a live demonstration and end with a summary. And finally, we want to end the whole webinar with a question and answer session. Before we start the introduction, I would like to ask you a question. Therefore, I will now present you a poll. So the question, do you currently use any of the following tools for automated UI testing? Please select all that apply. Wonderful, 80% reached, great, thank you. This is perfect, we reached 85%. I think this is a good representative number. So I will close the poll and share with you the results. Here we go. Wonderful, it's a quite exciting mix of Ranorex Studio users and Selenium users, and also customers who are not doing automated or users who do not automated UI testing currently. Perfect, wonderful. Thank you very much for participation. So, all right, let's get straight into it. First question, why Ranorex Webtestit? This might be a question that's pretty interesting for the existing Studio customers. And I want to answer this question with something that I experienced in my past, in my automation projects, that running a successful UI test automation project is not an easy thing to do. So here at Ranorex, we have a clear mission. If you select Ranorex as tool, we want that you have success in your UI test automation. So with Ranorex Studio, we offer a product that offers you the most powerful UI test automation technology on the market. So if Ranorex Studio fits to your needs, to your use cases, to your requirements, to your skill set, then there is no need for another tool, no need for Webtestit. But we also see that Ranorex Studio does not fit for all use cases and needs that are out there. Most prominently, we have the limitation on Windows or C#. Especially on the web, we see many companies starting their automation project with the most popular UI testing technology currently available on the market, which is Selenium. But if we met these companies again after some time, they often told us that they stopped their automation project because it was failed or did not achieve the results that were expected. So we listened to the issues that they had and asked ourselves, what could we do in order to help these companies we are not able to address currently with Ranorex Studio? And the answer was, we introduce a new product. And this is now where Ranorex Webtestit comes into place. Ranorex Webtestit, it's a tool to create UI tests for web applications. So we follow the same mission with Ranorex Webtestit as we do with Ranorex Studio. So we want to lead a customer to do a successful automation project. So what's the unique thing about this Ranorex Webtestit? The special thing here is that you select the automation technology that fits best to your needs. And Webtestit then supports you to use this test technology in the best and most efficient way. So I see Ranorex Webtestit somehow as the missing link. Because if you take a look on tools that are offered for web testing, you see on the one side these simple record and replay tools like Selenium IDE. And on the other side, you have the direct usage of the Selenium API in the code. So why do I call it now the missing link? Because the record and replay approach will lead pretty fast to a so-called maintenance hell. What is that? That's what I call when your maintaining costs when your maintenance costs are that high that they somehow escalate, yeah, and it's not worth anymore to spend more on the project because you are just continuing on the maintenance and you're not able to produce new tests. So on the other side, we have now the direct usage of Selenium as library in the code, which is okay, but which enforces strong development skills because, as I said, it's just a library. And that leads us now to the question, what benefits does Webtestit now offer? And as mentioned, you need good coding skills in order to master Selenium. And this is now an important message. With Ranorex Webtestit, you do not have to be now a Selenium expert in order to run a successful Selenium project. Why? Because we generate you a project and we generate you code following best practices and implementing design patterns that ensure maintainability and reusability of your test code. In addition to that, we saw 4 big pain points in Selenium project that cost time and very often lead to the fact that tests run unstable. So first of all, there was this setup and configuration issue. So if you want to set up Selenium the first time, it's not a that easy task. And in addition, you need to configure the drivers and so on and so on. So this is the first part. Second, we see synchronization issues. What's that? Today we have all these Ajax, fancy Ajax things going on, and that means that elements are not there when the DOM is first loaded, so we need to wait. And this is something we need, which is where you need additional skills to handle that in Selenium. And a third thing is that bad selectors cause unstable tests, which means you need to identify somehow the elements you interact with. You use for that selectors. And if the selectors are unstable or not properly chosen, then a simple UI change might break your whole test. And at the end, and this is the most important thing from my point of view, you run into a maintenance nightmare when you do not follow certain design patterns and best practices. So, second part, Webtestit provides now some sort of flexibility. The idea is choose the test technology that fits best to your needs. Currently, Webtestit offers 2 test technologies. It's Selenium and Protractor, and there is more to come. So if you have an Angular site, maybe it's more interesting to choose a Protractor instead of Selenium. This is the flexibility we want to provide you with Webtestit. And in addition to that, we see the use case that test automation code in agile teams has certain aspects that maybe Wildan can explain now a bit.
Yeah, finally I can say something as well, right? So we'll coming to the part where we're talking about the agile environments. So imagine your team has testers and they also have developers. And nowadays, both parties are responsible that your code is shipped in a proper condition, so that it's properly tested, that you make sure that new features don't introduce issues with existing features. So what we're wanting to say here with produces open test code. First, we're making use of open source tools to build our things. So That's the first part. And then your project also builds upon open source tools, which most developers are likely to know. If you're coming from the Java world, we're having also those best practices applied here. So the great thing is like both parties, be it testers and developers, can work with, let's say, test runners or APIs that they're already used to. And the great thing is, of course, in an agile environment, you want to make sure that you execute your tests as often as possible. You most likely heard the term like shift left, so it means like do it earlier in your process. And this is why integration with a CI server and respectively doing this via Git integration is so important.
Thank you, well done. So this were the main benefits, and we want to switch now to the live demonstration. What we're gonna want to show you is we want to create a professional Selenium project from scratch. So, and then we want to create 2 tests. I will shortly guide you through the things we plan to have. So I will open now my Chrome. Here is the demo shop where we will execute our tests on. It's a simple shop, a WooCommerce shop. So what we want to do now is we add an item here into the cart, and then we want to check in the cart if the amount of the item is properly calculated. And with a second test, we will add a second item to the cart and then check if the amount is updated properly. So some simple tests which are pretty good to show the benefits of Webtestit. But before we jump into the tool, let me explain you the basic concept of Webtestit. So we will start at a web page. And on the web page, maybe you notice I'm feeling lucky button from Google. You have this button that we want to interact with. So when we want to use now this button in Webtestit, we create an element out of this button. And this element then is used in certain actions. So like click on the element or hover over the element and so on. And what is now very unique in Webtestit, we promote that you put this element and actions together in a page object. And here is the first time we hear now this design pattern of the page object, which just says, which should actually make sure that your code stays maintainable. And the idea is that an element should just be defined in one location and then used through a defined access point. So when you have this page object ready, it's pretty easy to use them then into your tests. So the new thing for Selenium Pros is maybe the term now that we use in Webtestit, elements for identified things from the page and actions when we use this element. So enough with theoretical stuff. Let's now take a look how that looks like in Webtestit. Here you see Ranorex Webtestit. And for our purpose, I would now create a new project. So let's call it our webinar demo. And what you might see here is already very interesting. We talked before about flexibility in terms of which test technology you should use. And you see here 2 technologies that we provide. It's Java with Selenium and Protractor. I'm sure Wildon will choose Protractor, but unfortunately I'm doing the demo, so I will choose Java and Selenium.
Oh my gosh.
So let's start now. Wildon, maybe you can tell us a bit what's happening now in the background.
Yeah, right. So as you can read there, we say we're registering an archetype. And for everybody that is familiar with the ecosystem of Java, you know that Maven is still a big player around. So how Maven works is like it enables you to have templates, which are so-called archetypes, and define a project in full. So by applying that archetype, of course, first registering it, you can pretty much scaffold the complete project out of the scratch. So you end up with a fully working project. And you see, like the first time it's taking a bit of a time. Now we're on to the second step where it's actually applying the scaffold. And yeah, in just a few moments, we should be about to get started. And once we see that finished, we'll have a proper look at the UI of Webtestit once we come into the project itself. So the demo gods are hopefully with us on that one. Yeah, perfect. It's loading. And you see you are now welcomed by a project screen. So first things first, you might think, yeah, that actually looks a bit comfortable and known from other stuff I'm using like IntelliJ or perhaps VS Code or just whatever tool or IDE you're preferring to use. So you'll see that on the left side, like in a classic IDE, we have our project structure. And the fun thing here is, as said, we had an archetype applied, so it gets pre-set up with all the things that you might gonna need later on. So as an example, you're definitely not gonna want to set up how the Chrome driver is installed or how the Firefox, the Gecko driver actually is named, gets set up, the paths are configured. Then after the configuration of the paths, how you instantiate the driver, how you properly make sure to dispose it after a run. Oh, and by the way, might you want to keep it around if you have an issue? So you see, like, there are a lot of steps that you typically would have to set up first before writing your first single test. And with Ranorex Webtestit, you pretty much get that for free. But we're going even a step further. So in nowadays proper project configurations, you would have at least have, for instance, an editor config, I would say, where simple things like the indentation size and indent style. Yeah, by the way, let's not start a holy war here upon spaces and tabs, I would say, but we just went ahead with 4 size indentation and spaces. And so on. And of course, no proper Java project would be real without a POM file, where you see that we already made sure that all the dependencies that you need for your future successful project are already there, are already installed, and everything gets pre-wired.
Thank you, Wilden. I think this was the development speech to tell us that we just solved the configuration setup part, and Webtestit took over the work for us, which is great. Thank you very much. But now I'm interested in creating the test. So let's switch to our web page, because this is actually the thing we want to test. And remember, we want now to add this item into the cart. So what would be the first thing to do if you do a traditional Selenium project? You need somehow to identify this button here. And for this, we go now to the inspect panel, and we would have need to figure out which is a good selector here. But actually, honestly, I do not want to waste my time on that. I want to produce tests. So I want to just give me a selector that fits. And for this purpose, we created an additional tooling which fits perfectly into the Chrome environment, which is called Ranorex Velocity. And Ranorex Velocity, by the way, is a free tool which you can use also without Webtestit. But in combination with Webtestit, you see the whole power of this tool. So what we see here is obviously Ranorex Velocity already created selectors for us that are very robust and which I'm gladly able to take. But let's start with the use case of that we want to divide our page a bit in reusable elements. So the first thing that I see here is this start page that I would identify as a page object. So I would click now on this create page object button and identify this area as a page object. So I give it a name. I would say it's the start page, and click on send. So what happened in the background is that we created a page object for this section in Webtestit. So I'm not finished. What I need next is this element. And here I simply click, send the selector to Ranorex Webtestit. And now, as you see, it's added to the page object. So I'm still not finished. What would be the next thing? I want to switch to the cart. That's why I create a second page object, which is the navigation panel. Maybe the most used, sorry, wrong case. I want to create a new page object. So let's use this navigation panel, because you will probably use it for most of the navigations through this page. So send it again to Webtestit, and now we can inspect the card button and send this selector to the page object. Great, card is ready. So add this to card, go to the card, and now we have our third page object, which is the card in general. So again, create a new page object, select the area. I call it the card page object, send it to Webtestit, and the thing we want to validate is actually if this amount is correct. So I inspect this again and send this element now to Webtestit. So we have now everything that we need for our tests. We created the page objects and the elements we want to interact with. Time to produce the tests.
Well, hold on, Michael. Maybe before you're starting with the test, maybe we should first take a look at what happened here, because like you did actually quite a lot of clicks around, and I have no freaking idea what could be potentially done. So let me just shortly inspect what is created here. So we said we started with a start page. Oh yeah, right. That was here, that part with all these logos and the nice product that we could add there. Then we had the second page where we just used it for the navigation panel, and finally we landed on the card page to check our totals. So what could be interesting here to see is like what happens here. So we see it's just a default Java class that gets generated, and oh yeah, there's this elements panel. So remember what we told you just right before. Our product creates the association between elements and actions. So an element in our case, if we look here, it's the add to cart. Remember that was actually the add to cart button. So once you open that, an element consists of a name. The name is frankly also called then the constant that you're going to populate in there. Oh, by the way, did you see, like if you hover over here, you see the same picture. Yeah, and let's get back. So element consists out of a name, a selector, so the actual way how we get the element, and then a strategy. The strategy can be a CSS or XPath or everything else that could fit in, for instance, for links like a link name, etc. So a selector plus a strategy turns into a locator. So a locator is always denoted by dot whatever strategy you want and the selector. And as you see, like you don't need to manually write these things, because let's be honest, if you're on a page with a lot of elements, typing all of this over and over again is first of all super boring, and second, like super error prone. So I think that's a pretty good start there. So how should we go on with that now, Michael?
Thanks, Wildan, for the explanation. So what I would need next is actually the actions. What actions do I want to perform now on the elements? And we start here with the start page. Here we have this button. I will, of course, the name is already okayish, but still I will change the name now to add to cart button, or add to cart, add item 1 to cart. And now I will use this item as an action. There we provide now some pretty nice convenience. So we just drag and drop these elements to the code, and now we can select the action we want to perform on the element. So in our case, we have a simple thing. We just want to click on the element. So I select the click action, and there happened now something. Wildan?
Yeah, so obviously we got some code generated, right? But let's take a proper look at our code. So yeah, maybe first we want to rename the function to something meaningful, like how about add first item to cart, as an example. And what we're seeing here is like we're trying to follow the best practices of a page object pattern. That means like every function should return either a simple basic type like a string, integer, or whatever, or another page object or yourself. So most likely after adding the cart, we're still going to stick around in the same start page and do something else. That's why by default the start page is returned. And now let's come to the interesting part. So normally you would just do, yeah, get the element and then click it. But I guess everyone that worked a little bit more with Selenium experienced at least once the situation that he wanted to click on an item which wasn't yet there, simply as said. So remember what Michael said, modern pages, especially single page applications, do render things on the fly, low data, so that can take a while. And it's always a good practice to say, let's wait until the element is actually visible and then do the click for it. So without you having to do all these boilerplate, we make sure that this gets every time auto-generated for you.
So what you're telling me that I just get rid of some parts of the synchronization problem, which is great because now I can just hop on to the next thing I want to implement. It's on the navigation panel. If you remembered if you want to know now what we have to do now, we want to click on this card button right here. So we drag and drop it again into the code and again, click on the element. In this case, we will call it go to card, and here something special happens. Will then?
Yeah, right. So as we just said a few seconds ago, like page object method should always return either base types or a page object. And in this case, once we go to the card, we as a developer or tester know this is most likely going to change our active page object. So instead of returning yourself, in this case, navigation panel, how about we just return a card? Because this is the next follow-up. So in this case, of course, you would then tab into the return value and just say like return a card with the driver there. And the nice thing about that is if you switch now to our page object overview, you actually can see what's happening. And the cool thing is, remember, you're here in the navigation panel, but hovering over this card already shows you the picture of the next follow-up item. That way you created a sort of a chainable API. This is what we typically refer to as a DSL, so a domain-specific language. We'll come to that when we're starting with our first test.
Okay, then let's finish our elements and actions that we need for our first test. So the last thing is the amount. So here we have this total amount, and here we will not click on it, but we want to actually get the elements text. So get total amount. And now we have everything available in our project to start the first test. So here we go. Let's start with our first sample test. And here we see already some guidance through the comments. First, we should somehow instantiate our page objects, and I do not want to take care about that myself. Please, I want to support here. So I just want the shortcut of instantiation of the page object. And we will start our journey with the start page. What you see here are some nice editor features to just speed me up a bit. And we will perform our tests now on the demo shop.
So while Michael is typing here, let me shortly brief you about what we're actually going to do. We said we're helping you with best practices. So another best practice when it comes to writing proper maintainable tests is to actually use a pattern called arrange, act, assert. You might heard the term AAA, which is exactly the same thing. So this helps you to have a readable test that later on, if people come back to that like a few months later, as an example, you still understand what's happening. And look at the test now, how it's written. You can't anywhere see specifics to the Selenium API. So all that the user sees is actually like a start page instantiation. Then we say in a super easy language like open that site. On the next page, we're saying then instantiate the first item to the card, so edit there. And once we're there, we have the navigation panel. And in the nav panel, we can then make sure to go to the card. So by reading that, it's already in a, let's say, proper English version. I mean, by the terms how well we are writing the text, right? So A great thing here is now what you see, what Michael is doing with the go-to card is, we said it's returning the next PO. So instead of you having to instantiate it, we see that the return value is actually the card. So you just follow along and then use card get total amount and store that somewhere, let's say in this amount variable. And to conclude our AAA pattern, we have to make sure to have an assertion which makes sure that the value is actually the expected value. In this case, it's like the 1.5k euros. Oh hell, Michael, what are you doing there? This is going to produce a wrong test.
Yeah, that's true. That's unfortunately also the life of a tester. Not all tests run through. So what I expect from an IDE is also support, or from a testing tool is also support when the test fails. And before we take a look on the succeeding test, let's take a look how it behaves when the test fails. So in order to execute it, the last thing we need is where do we want to execute it? So we have this simple endpoints panel here, and we just say, okay, I want to test it on Chrome, save the endpoint, it's done, and I can execute it. So what we will see now is it's the first time that we use Chrome, so it will install the drivers and dependencies.
Maybe I can chime here again, like, because this is getting pretty technical, right? So what's happening here is, like we told you in the beginning, a pretty great burden here is like to deciding where do I get the proper driver, god damn it. I mean, like my Chrome just updated yesterday and the driver is also available, but from somewhere else. So I need to get things in sync. So if we remember, synchronization was one of the major goals that we want to help you with. So reading here the logs, you can see clearly that we're downloading the things for you in the background, setting up the paths, passing it on to Maven in order to execute the test properly. And that way you're pretty good and on the safe side to execute your test. Of course, this isn't for free. The first time it takes a while until you get all these things, until you get them compiled, but be sure that the next runs should be much faster. So we're just waiting here for a second for Chrome to pop up. And bam, here it is.
So let's see if the test fails as expected. It navigates to the card panel, great. And we get as result, unfortunately, as we see right here, a failed test line. So let's take a look what happened. Here you see this report that Webtestit provides, which should help you to have a good overview of the status of your tests. And we see here the failing test.
But that's super great. I mean, like, yeah, you somehow by magic parsed what actually was the luck here. What I as a developer would now really like to know, like, where in my test did this actually fail? So what step did produce it? This is just not enough info for me.
So let's take a look if there is more for us.
Ah, all right.
Cool. So an image says more than 1,000 words. In case of an error case, of course, Webtestit adds also an image to help you to investigate where the problem was. So we know the problem, and I would say let's just fix it. Jump to the test case and fix this problem by adding the 0 sign, and we are done. So this test case will pass now, but I would also say to show the power of the framework that we just recreated, I would say we quickly add a second test, which just adds a second item. So what do we need to add a second item? It's not that much, because we will now say we have to expand the start page object pattern. And for this, I will just switch back to the shop. Let's empty this. And here we want to add the second element. So I just send it to Webtestit. It's there. Great. So I add both to the cart, and we're going to check the amount, which is 2,700. Great. Let's switch back to Webtest, and what we see there, okay, here's the second item. So I'd call it just add item 2 button. Again, we drag and drop it into the code, perform the mouse click, add second item to cart, give it a proper name, and now we have everything available for the second test. So let's switch back to the test. We create a second test stub, and as we do pretty much the same as before, I just copy this, paste it here, and the only thing that differs is we do not only add the first item, but also add the second item to the cart. And of course, also the amount changes to this 2,700. So we will change also the expected result back to 2,700, and that's it. And now to finish this demo, I would say I do not want to run these tests now on Chrome. I would say run this test please on Firefox, and maybe there's more nice things to discover here, Wilden.
Yeah, sure. So one nice thing is like being able to run all your local browsers. So Michael, if you just pop over there just for a second, open again the drop down with the browsers, no local endpoints, yeah, you see like that Webtestit tries to understand what browsers are installed on your actual platform. So since we are here on a Windows machine, we have Edge and Internet Explorer available, plus keep that in mind, everything pre-configured. And we saw like that the other famous ones, Safari and Opera, aren't yet there. Being on a Mac, you most likely would have also Safari by default. So that's great for developing and fixing tests. But if you are about to run hundreds and hundreds of tests, that would become quite boring, I guess, on this local system. So you would make use of a remote endpoint. And on the remote section, you see like that we're going with one of the most prominent players out there. It's called Sauce Labs. So with Sauce Labs, you just have an account, you're logged in. You can configure your data center, whether it's from the US or from the EU, and then just say, yeah, I would like to run my test on this super old version of Firefox for whatever reason, but you just add those things, add like, for instance, 10 different browsers and start them all in parallel. And great, for other scenarios where you want to do things inside because you're working on, let's say, proprietary stuff, Selenium Grid might be a great option. So just ping that and do other things. And custom endpoints, last but not least, if you switch to the third tab, yeah. Over there, we just let you the freedom to use whatever driver or endpoints you want. So for instance, like Browser Stack or any other fancy tool that you might find there. So yeah, let's add Firefox, I guess, and run our tests again.
So we will execute now both tests, I would say, on Firefox and see if both of them succeed. So again, we have here the situation that we run Firefox for the first time. So as Wilden explained previously for Chrome, here again, we install the dependencies, set up the local driver, and now are starting the test. So here we go. The first test just adds the first item to the card and checks it. Okay, he starts with the second test, and now he will execute also the first test. This is the test that failed previously. We fixed it now and hopefully get now the result.
Well, heck, Michael, it seems like we made it. We could be hired as the next super testers, right?
Great. We have a good. We have the result here. So we created now in, I would say, what was it, in some minutes, a test project from scratch and executed it on Chrome and Firefox. So this was the live demonstration. I would say we switch now back to the slides because they're very We are very close to the end. So the summary, I want to start with the business cornerstones. With Webtestit, you get, of course, a bit more than just a tool, as you already know from Ranorex. So you get here, in addition, a community, access to many how-tos, and an excellent support via forum. As I told you, our mission is to guide you in the best way so that you have a successful UI test project. So how can you get it? It's purchasable via our online store. In the same way as we do it with Studio, we also provide a 30-day trial so that you can see that it fits to your needs, the tool. And in difference to Ranorex Studio, we offer Webtestit with a subscription model, which is currently with 40 bucks a month. But we have an early bird action going on, which reduces this amount a bit. So last slide before we end. What is Webtestit is actually, it complements the product offering of Ranorex. It works on Windows, on Mac, and on Linux, and it's meant to perfectly fit into an agile development environment. So you can use the UI, the open source UI test technology that fits best to your needs, but still we provide you this guidance to run or to master this technology in the best way. And of course, there's also the situation that in agile teams, you follow the pattern of having shared code. So the code that we produce could also be executed in a normal IDE. So last but not least, which is a main benefit if you use Webtestit for mid and long term, we see it with our tests and first customers. Webtestit really reduces significantly the costs to build robust and maintainable tests. So hopefully these are the best preconditions to ensure that also your UI test project will be a success with using Ranorex tooling. I'm at the end of the presentation. Let me end the presentation as I started it with a poll, if you would be so kind. Might I share with you the second and last poll that we have? As you see now, what Ranorex Webtestit was able to offer. I would be pretty curious if you see something that you see as mandatory in order that Webtestit attracts you. So we have here these different options. I'm very interesting what you will see here as the most important thing. Okay, we have 70%. Maybe we can reach a bit more. If you would be so kind, that's a very interesting question for us, for our future feature planning and the direction of Webtestit.
We're at 76%. We can make it.
Awesome. Maybe 4%, and then we have reached the 80. It's a head-to-head race. Okay, great. Here we go. Thank you very much. We reached the 80%. And I would say let's not now just look at the results. Thank you for sharing your opinion here. So we see a nice, pretty equally that you want to have another programming language and support for mobile applications. So there I have to tell you good news, because this is actually the things we plan to do. And also good to see that something else is pretty low. So we seem to have a good touch on what is missing in the tool and where we need to develop our tool. So I would say thank you very much, and let's now go into the Q&A panel.
Right, so we had a question here, whether all these tutorials and I guess the video that we made here are going to be available for the public there. So first of all, we introduced at the beginning our discourse forum where there are very nice people looking around to help you wherever they can, be it with our tool or even provide you some guidance with basic issues in Selenium that you might figure out. What we're also doing there is like we're constantly writing articles on very often happening issues and trying to explain that for people. So directly in the app, if you press F1, you most likely found a similar feature in VS Code or even IntelliJ, etc. So if you click in there and start typing some potentially interesting questions, so like Selenium, I don't know, whatever, you already get a section down there which is called How To. So where we can actually find helpful things that are related to our question. So clicking on that brings you directly on to our Ranorex Webtestit discourse forum. And the great thing about this is like, let's just see at our how-to section how many of them we are. So we're currently at 58. So as time goes on, we'll definitely make sure to add more and more things. How we do that is like, if you have questions, we see to answer you quickly. And if it's usable for the other crowd, yeah, we'll damn sure make sure everybody can read those things. So definitely go out there, check it out, discourse.webtestit.com. You don't necessarily need to be registered to read it. So we're gladly to see that. Also, another question, if I may just continue, Michael, is whether we have a Jira integration. Well, the good news is like we have quite a lot of integrations. It's just like sadly we only have an hour time today, and we're planning to do follow-up webinars where we go into details with our other integrations. So Jira is definitely one. Let's be honest. Everybody likes Jira. Everybody uses Jira. So yeah, we damn sure made sure to have that integration. Our features allow you to create automatically an issue from the report, jump to that, see what happens, reopen it, close it. So you get all the bells and whistles there. But of course, we have also nice integrations with a tool called TestRail. So I guess some of you use that test management software. And also there, you can import all your tests from TestRail and get a fresh new scaffolded project for you, which even further reduces the boilerplate that you would have to write. Same applies, of course, for sending back the results. All right, have you found something interesting for the party out there, Michael?
Yes, there is an interesting one. It's about the integration with TestRail.
That was just what I told this moment. Didn't you listen to me, man?
Sorry, I was just answering a question.
Right, yeah. Maybe I just continue with one. I saw quite a lot of questions which are like, do you support Azure DevOps? Do you support Jenkins? Do you support, I don't know, whatever else is out there, Bamboo, etc. So good news, yes. We also didn't show that yet, but you can also use Webtestit as a CLI tool. And as a CLI tool with some simple commands, you can pass it on features like, yeah, please run the tests or run test filters, so only certain of them are started. You can also say like, when the test did finish, also create a report, like a PDF report, and export that to a place where you would like to have. So that makes it actually super easy to integrate with any CI provider out there, because it means essentially, yeah, call a binary and just pass it on those command line parameters. Since this might be troublesome for people starting out with CI integrations, if I can just have the mouse for a second, we also made sure to describe these things in detail. So like Jenkins, just search for that. And yeah, here's a how-to article on how to get started with a Jenkins integration on Windows, on Mac OS, and on Linux. And you'll find all sorts of these things additionally for the other tools. Michael, yeah, headless browsers. That's true. Yeah, we don't want to waste time looking around for what the browser is actually doing. So as Michael shows off here, when you pick a browser that supports headless mode, for instance, the Chrome driver, Chrome is already used, yeah. You can just tick on the capability headless, and that works. Besides that, in the capabilities box, you can see that you can type pretty much whatever you want and have your custom configurations, like starting Chrome in a mobile device environment where you simulate a mobile phone or an iPad or so on.
There is an interesting question about the Ranorex velocity, and also the tool that we presented you to find the elements, to identify the selectors, is called Ranorex velocity, and it's available in the Chrome store for free. So just feel free to use its power for your purpose. And maybe this is an additional good question. So is Velocity a cut-down version of Ranorex Spy, Brian? Actually, yes, it's a very limited version of the Ranorex Spy. It doesn't have the power of it, but it provides the basic needs to create the web tests without this actual power to maintain and to edit the paths. But of course, it also provides some playgrounds where you can play around and check if your selectors work properly.
I've also read quite a lot of questions about whether we do support some way of data bound scenarios where you run through a set of samples. So in order to answer that, first of all, what you see is happening in Webtestit is you just get code. So you're allowed to do whatever you think is the right way, or modify the code in whichever way you like. But to get you started with such a sample, let's just go out to the start screen, and you can see there's a sample directory. We can just download a few samples to get you going. So here, of course, is our demo shop, and you can find the same demo shop also for TypeScript, but there's also this data-driven sample. And in this sample, we're just automating a site and sending multiple user logins and seeing what is wrong or what is not wrong. So make sure to check it out, download it, open, and try it for yourself.
So there is a very interesting question from Richard. If all of the development efforts are web-based, would you recommend Webtestit instead of Ranorex? And as I explained at the start of this presentation, currently there is no test technology on the market which is more powerful than the test technology which is offered by Ranorex Studio. So if it fits to your use cases, if you do not have some limitations like Mac users and so on, I would surely go with Ranorex Studio because it's much more powerful. But if you're not able to do so and you need and your use cases need an additional or another tool, then of course Ranorex Webtestit will help you a lot.
Maybe I would like also to add a few words to that. Yeah, so as Michael properly said, Studio is the tool to go because it supports like so many different technologies and stuff. But we also have customers who are like big companies, and they have various teams. So they have teams with different skill sets, different targets. They are not only creating one product, but like hundreds of products. And some of them do fit better for this product, whereas people who are coming with a strong Selenium background so far didn't have a great chance to use it. Or just imagine you're on a Mac and yeah, what should you do? So we want to make sure to have an offer for everyone. And the great thing about that is like we're using the same ideas with Studio and with Webtestit in like helping you doing the setup and configuration, reducing the issues with synchronization, making sure you get the best selectors that are available, and of course, like helping you with the maintenance with nice reports, better insights in what went wrong, etc.
Oh, we have 5 minutes to go. Maybe there is another question dealing with the reusability of the code that Webtestit generates. So as we told you, it was a use case to to fit into agile environments. And in agile environments, there should not be only one person responsible for the UI tests. It should be the whole team. And it's often the case that one is the driver of the UI tests and the others are just there to make quick fixes and so on. And we want to support this use case, and therefore, yes, the code that Webtestit produce is usable in other IDEs. There is no limitation on that. But of course, you will lose all of these productivity features and convenience features that Webtestit offers.
Also keep in mind that while we promote the page object pattern, you get also some good side benefits. So one of that is like, just take a look here. So the nitty-gritty parts happen actually in the nitty-gritty parts of the automation happen inside the page object, but the lady or the guy who writes the test actually doesn't need to know anything about that. I mean, they're just seeing that easy cheesy DSL saying like, yeah, open the page, add first item, add second item, and go to cart. Now, just imagine you would have all of that in your tests interweave together, and our page suddenly says, yeah, there is no more button, but you first need to mouse over the item, then something flies in, and then only after a few seconds, the buy button appears. So that would make like serious trouble here for testers who just want to define their test procedures. By having this separation, we're also helping people to say like, use this best practice so you can write tests easily, but if something changes in the way how you should add an item to your cart, you just, oh yeah, you're an Eclipse key binding, so I need to go to definition here. You just go there and maybe a developer or a more experienced engineer can actually implement a different change. And this is now where we talked about chainability. If you have multiple tests and they will use that chain, everybody will profit from these changes. So people can work together. The guys who know the automation just do that. The others can also create tests and don't have to wait on anything.
Okay, there are two more additional questions which are quite interesting. One thing is, could you show an example of importing one Selenium IDE project? This is quite an interesting topic, and I would say there will be upcoming webinars with Webtestit, and you can be sure that there will be one webinar which deals with this topic. So currently we cannot show it because we run out of time, but you will see this in an upcoming webinar. And another question I want to answer on, it's from David Alonso. It's again about is it better to use Webtestit than Ranorex Studio for web testing? So maybe my answer again for this thing is the following. Webtestit uses open source test technologies like Selenium, like Protractor, and it will use more in the future. And Ranorex Studio uses Ranorex test technology. And the Ranorex test technology is more powerful than the open source test technology. So whenever we run battles here in our company, Selenium tests versus Ranorex tests, Ranorex wins. So we have to modify more on the Selenium level, and on Ranorex it runs just out of the box.
Let me give you a very easy sample that nearly every Selenium developer has experienced so far. Selenium is great when it comes to testing the website, but if the browser behaves strange, so like there's a native pop-up from IE or there's a native pop-up from Chrome, or you want to switch around tabs, etc., this is oftentimes where it gets super blurry. Or just remember the last time you had to do a drag and drop operation. How painful was that to be done in Selenium, in pure Selenium API? So this is where Ranorex Studio really shines, because it's not coming from the context of the browser's DOM, so operating inside the page. It really has all the power to work on it from the outside. So in theory, you can cheat your way around and just drag around the browser and make it do whatever you like to have it behave. So there should be also always the option to go with Studio.
So we are at the end. Thank you very, very much for participation. It was a very interesting session for us to see your questions. And maybe a finished sentence, because it was the question, are you going to share this meeting somewhere? Of course, you will receive this video afterwards to watch it as an on-demand webinar. So great, we are done. Thank you very much. Looking forward to see you more often in future webinars. Have a good afternoon, good morning. Goodbye from my side.
Goodbye.